Discover the incredible transformation of a dying cowboy saved by a strong widow and her 3 kids. Jake rode the barren expanse of his ranch, the once vibrant fields now bone dry, each hoofbeat echoing the weight of his burdens. Shadows clung to his shoulders, whispers of his late wife haunting the air with each gust of wind that swept through the creaking trees. The sun blazed overhead, merciless, just like the pressures of his mounting debts, heavy, palpable, stinging like a rattlesnake bite. If the bank didn't relent, the place where he'd built his life would slip from his grasp, a legacy washed away like dust in the wind. Hope felt as distant as the horizon, and the news from the doctor crashed over him like a thunderstorm. His illness wasn't just terminal, it was swift. He wondered, would he ever see the ranch thrive again? Days blurred into nights filled with restless thoughts, more often than not his breath coming in ragged, uneven gasps. Ideals of strength and independence that defined him wrestled with an insidious fear. What if he wasn't strong enough, not just to fight his health, but to reclaim his home? What would the townsfolk think? Would they see him as a failure? Each judgment made him feel smaller, a once gallant cowboy reduced to broken dreams sealed in a dusty barn. The pastor's silence echoed louder than any voice of encouragement. Just as the shadows nipped at his heels, a sudden flurry of movement caught his eye. A cloud of dust approached from the road. The unfamiliar sight, a woman accompanied by 3 children. Each child's laughter pulled at him like a distant memory. He remembered the joy of family, the warmth of shared struggles, now buried beneath layers of loss. The newcomer, Clara, exuded a spirit he thought he'd long lost, a raw and wild energy sparking with potential. Before he could brace himself, she was there, extending her hand, the promise of healing woven into her intent. Her charm cut through his defenses, awakening something he dared not acknowledge, an ember of purpose. He hesitated, questioning if he was worthy of the help, or if he'd just be dragging her down alongside him into the quicksand of his failures. Just then, he interrupted the internal storm with a sudden resolution. They had work to do. Man and woman, side by side, began to resurrect the desolate grounds. Days filled with purpose followed, the rhythmic clattering of tools, children's laughter weaving through the air. Yet each smile nudged the anxiety closer to the surface. What if he wasn't enough? The sickening feeling of impending doom settled like a stone in his gut. Clara deserved better than a man shackled with regrets and failed ambitions. Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now, let's continue. As the weeks wore on, Clara's fire ignited hope within him, until the reality of his crumbling life struck hard. The shadow of foreclosure loomed larger, the bank breathing down his neck. The pressure mounted, tearing at the delicate fabric of what they were building together. The whispers started, memories of his wife's accident resurfacing, and the unspoken judgments clawing at his pride. Jake was terrified. What would the townsfolk see when they looked at him now? The will to fight hung precariously on a thread, a fragile woven tapestry on the verge of unraveling. With Clara by his side, he had to summon the courage, but the voices stayed with him, the judgment, the stares, the reminders of failure. Could he bear the weight of his past, or would it crush whatever connection he'd begun to build? As uncertainty loomed, Jake stood at a crossroads, teetering on the edge of desperation. The world around him transformed, but deep down, the question echoed. Could love truly conquer the indifference of a world that had always judged too quickly? Every morning felt like an uphill battle for Jake as he wrestled with the ever-looming specter of defeat. The daily grind of mending fences and tending to livestock became entwined with the gnawing anxiety of impending foreclosure. Clara's unwavering presence was a balm to his aching spirit, yet each laugh from her children sent jolts of anxiety through him. The joy they found in simple tasks reminded him of warmth he once shared with his own family, and heightened the fear of loss should he fail yet again. As they worked the land, Jake fought between hope and despair. Every sunny day breathed fresh life into the weeds of his tangled thoughts, but as twilight fell, shadows crept back in, whispering doubts. He couldn't ignore the questions clawing at his psyche. What if he couldn't pull through? What if he let Clara and her kids down? What if they proved to be just a momentary distraction from the inevitable? One evening, as he and Clara sat on the porch watching the sun dip below the hills, the fading light mirrored the shadows that stretched within him. Clara suddenly turned to him, her expression serious.
"Jake, you've done an incredible job here," she said, her voice steady but low. "But I can see the weight on your shoulders. You don't have to carry it alone." Her words struck him like a bullet, igniting something buried deep. He could hear the echo of what had always kept him at bay: pride. Would he let this stranger into his heart fully, risking vulnerability once again? Or would he shove her away, convinced that he was better off alone?
He wanted to believe that he could find a way to rise above his failures, but the fear of burdening her with his troubles loomed large. Faced with this emotional crossroads, an idea began to take shape in his mind, something he had never considered before. What if he turned to the community that once judged him? Perhaps he could reclaim his worth and theirs by facing the problem head-on. His heart raced at the thought, organizing a ranch event, a bit of old-fashioned cowboy hospitality, showcasing not just the land, but what he could still offer. Clara's eyes lit up at the suggestion, her enthusiasm spilling over as she pictured the possibilities, rallying her children to help. They carved out a plan, and the ensuing days became a blur of preparation, laughter, and a hint of renewed purpose. For the first time in months, he felt the chill of fear recede in the warmth of collective effort. The children brought life to the event. Their energy fueled Jake's determination. As he dug deep into the earth and plowed forward with Clara by his side, the bond between them transformed. Yet, as the day approached, the certainty he had felt began to wane. The old mindset crept back, casting doubt. Would the townsfolk really come? Could they look beyond his past? Clara's unyielding faith in him stood as a stark contrast to his inner turmoil, further igniting the need to confront his demons. The countdown ticked away like a metronome of fate. This felt like his last chance, a defining moment. The very night before the event, Jake found himself standing alone, staring out at the barren land that had held his dreams captive. He could turn back and retreat into the shadows, or step forward, risking everything. Every nerve ending tingled with uncertainty, but as he took a deep breath, he made a decision. He was tired of letting his fears dictate his life. It was time to face the crowd, to confront past judgments, and perhaps even redefine what being a cowboy and a man truly meant. The tension thickened as dawn approached. Tomorrow would tell a story of hope, empowerment, and authenticity. What would tomorrow bring? As the sun rose, Jake's heart brimmed with anticipation and dread. He would face not just the townsfolk, but also himself in a way he never had before. Would he be able to overcome his past, or would it once again overshadow the future he desperately wanted? As the sun climbed higher, bathing the ranch in warm golden light, Jake felt a fluttering mix of anxiety and exhilaration. The ranch's usual quiet had given way to a bustle of activity. Clara and her children moved like a whirlwind around him, setting up tables, arranging decorations, and preparing food. Their laughter echoed against the wooden fences and drifted through the fields, yet it felt like an inconvenient distraction for Jake. He stood still, overwhelmed, observing the landscape of his life but not fully participating in it.
The children scampered between him and Clara, drawing smiles from the otherwise distant corners of his mind. He wanted to join them, to lose himself in their innocent joy, but something held him tethered in place. Would he be able to face the inevitable judgment of neighbors? With each passing moment, he could feel the weight of uncertainty breathing down his neck. "Jake!" Clara's voice pulled him from his reverie. "Help me with these chairs, will you?" The simple request anchored him. As he stepped forward, he caught the eager glow in her eyes. The warmth of her energy ignited a spark within him, igniting determination amidst his doubt. He grasped the chair, and they set to work, their movements rhythmic, her laughter mixing with the sounds of the day. In that shared space, he felt a flicker of something new taking root, a resolve forged in the graceful acceptance of vulnerability. As the hours passed, Jake worked side by side with Clara and her kids, his earlier insecurities slowly fading like morning mist. The land that had once felt burdensome now mirrored a canvas of possibility. The ranch was transformed, filled with laughter and unity, yet he couldn't shake off the specter of his past. Each smile wrestled with memories of disappointment, whispers of his past failures. He stole a glance at the horizon, the wide expanse a reminder of how far he had come, yet still there were shadows of uncertainty echoing in his mind. As they took a break, sitting on the edge of the porch, Clara turned to him. "You know, Jake," she began cautiously, "this is more than just a gathering. It's a moment for you to reclaim your space, a chance to show them who you are now." Her words struck him with clarity. He had spent his life in a chamber of regret, too ashamed to project who he had become.
It struck him that perhaps Clara saw something in him, a confidence that had been buried under self-doubt. But how was he supposed to confront a community that had branded him a failure? The million-dollar question lingered uncomfortably in the air between them. "We're out here working hard. You've done so much," Clara added softly, her gaze fixed on him. "You're not this dark cloud of failure you think you are. You've been a part of this place all along." An ember of hope ignited in Jake's chest as he contemplated her words. Maybe it wasn't just about the community accepting him. It was about accepting himself first. The idea felt foreign yet tantalizing. What if he could turn the day into a declaration, a way to reclaim not just his ranch but his identity? As afternoon approached with its ripe golden light, the ranch began to fill. The laughter grew louder, mingling with the rustling leaves, pulsating with newfound energy. Jake took a deep breath, the tension surfacing once again. He started to question his resolve, to magnify those familiar what-ifs. Would they see him as the man he was striving to be, or would he remain shackled by his past?
As the first guests arrived and greeted Clara and the children with warmth, Jake's heartbeat quickened. He had one chance to confront his past and redefine his future. But would he rise to the occasion, or retreat once again behind invisible barriers? The moment loomed imminent, ready to challenge every fear, every doubt. He turned toward the sound of chatter, but felt rooted in place, uncertainty intertwining with determination. Would this moment open the door to a new beginning, or would he retreat into old shadows? As Jake stood at the edge of the porch, the murmurs of conversation and laughter rolled toward him like a tide, calling him in, urging him to join the joyous chaos. Each sound nudged at the layers of hesitation thick around him. Clara, her hands working meticulously in the kitchen, cast an occasional glance in his direction, her eyes an unwavering beacon of encouragement. Yet, despite that warmth, he felt anchored by an invisible weight, an echo of his past failures refracting through the joyous clamor around him. Jake's heart hammered in his chest, a frantic metronome that underscored his rising anxiety. Faces from the neighboring farms came into view, familiar yet distant, their eyes likely tracing the scars of his past. He imagined their whispers, their judgments, all the reasons he had built a fortress around himself over the years. What if they saw the remnants of who he used to be, instead of who he was striving to become? Yet pushing against that tide, a familiarity of resilience surged forth. Clara's words replayed in his mind, an invocation to rediscover his own humanity, to reclaim his presence in a world that had not forgotten him, but had lost connection over time. He had to believe that he was more than the ghost of his failures. With an exhale, Jake stood tall, the sun warming his back as he finally took a step forward, embracing that moment of choice. He was not just the man he was also the man he could be. Each crunch of gravel underfoot felt like a declaration, pulling him deeper into the array of conversations and laughter that beckoned him closer. As he approached the small group gathered around Clara, he was met by friendly faces, warm smiles, and an unexpected ease that washed over him. Their recognition felt like an unspoken reminder that every person in that space had their own story, their own battles. It ignited in him a desire not only to be seen, but to reciprocate that connection. They weren't here to judge, they were here to celebrate life. When Clara caught his eye, her smile widened, a signal of encouragement. She was his anchor in a swaying sea of emotion and social expectation. With her by her side, those familiar shadows began to dissipate. He introduced himself, engaging with guests, and soon found himself laughing alongside them, a surreal experience he hadn't expected. Each shared story acted as a bridge connecting him to his neighbors, each laugh a push against the walls he had built around himself. Yet, amidst the burgeoning connections, a deeper realization burrowed within him. This wasn't merely about acceptance, it was about the acceptance of oneself. He started to view the event not as a stage for judgment, but as an opportunity to pave new pathways in both his relationships and personal identity. He began to share his own stories, his struggles, his unexpected hurdles on the ranch. Their responses unfolded a tapestry of common ground, a shared humanity that enveloped him. But then, a sharp memory pierced through the glow of the moment, a flashing reminder of his past mistakes, the hurdles he had yet to face. A neighbor approached, a figure from his past who had witnessed his downfall. Jake's breath caught, a mixture of dread and anticipation coursing through him. Would they see him as he wanted to be seen, or would their gaze only bring back the weight of his history? With a shaky breath, Jake prepared to face the consequence of his fears. The moment had arrived where he could either retreat into the shadows or step bravely into the light. As the neighbor locked eyes with him, time slowed,
anticipation thickening the air around them. Would this be a confrontation or a crucial turning point in his journey? Jake's body tensed as the figure approached, the distant horizon of his past converging with the present. He recognized Jim, a rugged man whose face told stories of hard work and long days in the sun. Their paths had intertwined long before Jake's fall, but it was the fractures and missteps in his journey that marked them now. "Jake," Jim said, his tone steady but laced with an undercurrent of tension. "It's been a while." Jake swallowed hard. Each word felt like a stone in his throat, a reminder of the chasm that had opened between them years ago. "Yeah, it has." There was no hiding the tremor in his voice, each second stretching as they sized each other up. He could discern Jim's curiosity, perhaps even pity, but the underlying pressure was undeniable, a waiting game suspended between expectation and reality. The noise around them began to dim, the laughter and chatter fading into muted echoes, replaced by the pounding of his heart. What did Jim see in him? A ghost? A man still lost in his own shadow? Or was there a flicker of hope mingling within those wary eyes? "I heard you got the ranch back up and running," Jim continued. "That's a hell of an accomplishment." Jake nodded, unsure how to navigate this conversation. This wasn't merely about the ranch. This was about the person he had become in the process. Jim's expression softened, a flicker of understanding surfacing amidst their shared history. "Takes guts to start over. Not everyone can do it. Or wants to." Jake's voice came out rough-edged.
He was hesitant to voice the swirling emotions within. Vulnerability felt like a tightrope walk. The silence stretched, and then Jim spoke again, his words deliberate. "I'm rooting for you, Jake. It ain't easy facing what we've done, but you're out here trying. That's what matters." As those words settled over Jake, a cascade of emotions surged through him. 1 year earlier, he would have crumbled under such scrutiny, overwhelmed by the weight of his failures. This time, a flicker of self-respect ignited within. He was not just trying to endure, he was actively reclaiming his place in a world that had once felt foreign. "Thanks," Jake finally managed, the sincerity of it surprising him. The weight on his chest lightened slightly, reshaping into something more palatable. "It means a lot. Seriously." In this moment, a new clarity began to form around him. They hadn't merely come together at this juncture for confrontation. It felt more like a chance to establish the foundations of understanding, an opportunity for a shift, even in the shadow of their shared past. "Why don't you come by sometime? We can catch up, maybe share a few stories?" Jake suggested, the impulsiveness of the idea igniting a warmth he hadn't felt in ages. Jim looked surprised, yet pleased. "I'd like that." A smile broke across his weathered face, and for the first time, Jake could see a glimmer of mutual respect. As they shook hands, Jake felt a surge of momentum course through him, a turning point he hadn't anticipated. In that connection lay the promise of new beginnings, not just with Jim, but with himself. The weight of uncertainty still lingered just at the edges, a delicate balance of fear and anticipation. He had navigated one storm, but the horizon ahead was still murky. Would there be more challenges as he rebuilt ties with others? Would he have the strength to confront the mess of his past? But beneath the surface of those questions lay an undeniable ember of resilience. He would not merely exist within his new reality, he would flourish. As the warmth of conversation enveloped him once more, Jake felt the stirrings of personal empowerment. Perhaps reclaiming his place wasn't just about facing others, it was about embracing his own narrative without shame. His resolve hardened, yet the uncertainty gripped him tightly. What awaited him in the weeks to come? Would Jim's presence become an anchor, or would it signify deeper challenges he hadn't yet anticipated? The next encounter loomed on the horizon, a looming storm that promised to test everything he had just begun to uncover about himself. Days blurred into one another as Jake settled into a new rhythm at the ranch, each sunrise lifting the veil of unease that had shadowed his past. The landscape, vast and untamed, mirrored the complexities of his own emotions, a beauty tinged with remnants of struggle.
As he tackled daily chores, he felt his muscles strengthen, not just physically, but mentally, each task becoming a testament to his newfound resolve. Still, lingering questions about Jim haunted him. Their connection held a promise of renewal, a bridge across the chasms of regret. Yet there was also fear that this reunion would dredge up buried resentment or guilt, like fossils trapped in the layers of his old life. The thought made him restless. He found himself staring at the horizon during quiet moments, wrestling with the shimmer of hope and the dread of revisiting old scars. He made a conscious choice to allow that hope to blossom. One evening, after a long day of mending fences, Jake sat at the back porch, a dusty glass of lemonade in hand. The warmth of the setting sun bathed him in golden hues, prompting a flicker of inspiration. He pulled out a worn notebook, the pages yellowed and crumpled, remnants of his prior life. He hadn't written much since he lost everything. Words had felt like stones he couldn't lift. But tonight he felt the inkling of purpose push against his fingertips. "Just words," he muttered as he started to scribble. Thoughts poured out, unshackled and raw. They morphed into a tapestry of acknowledgments, his fears, his failures, and the stark realization that vulnerability wasn't weakness, but strength. Slowly, the narrative shifted from despair to empowerment, an embrace of the chaos that had once defined him. The act of writing felt like digging through soil to uncover roots, uncomfortable yet necessary. He wasn't just cataloging failures, he was redefining his identity, carving a path forward that diverged from the man he had been. The following week, when he met Jim again, neither of them knew how monumental it would turn out to be. Sitting across a weathered table at a local diner, the air filled with the smell of fried food and grease, Jake felt the familiar tension tighten in his stomach. Would Jim's perspective challenge everything he had begun to understand about himself? The conversations rolled forth, light banter mixed with glimmers of deeper truths. "I remember you used to have a thing for the rodeo," Jim said, a smirk forming. "Yeah, well, life doesn't always go as planned," Jake replied, his voice steady, even as memories churned within him. He hadn't simply fallen from the rodeo. He had fallen from grace, from a version of himself that had felt unbreakable. "You want to get back up?" Jim's question hung in the air, a challenge rather than an inquiry, laced with an edge of incredulity at Jake's quickened pulse. "Maybe," Jake responded, the uncertainty palpable yet exhilarating. The thought of confronting the world again rode beneath his skin, a bubbling excitement disguised as fear. As they navigated the conversation, Jake sensed a shift. With every shared laugh and story woven into their tapestry of memories, the weight of his past seemed to lift. They were two men on divergent paths, but now standing closer than ever, not chained by their shared history, but buoyed by their resilience. Yet, as they parted ways that evening, a new vestige of doubt arose in Jake's heart. What if he didn't possess enough strength to rise again? What if this hopeful chapter lulled him into a false sense of security, only to shatter under pressure? With the night wrapping its cloak around him, questions spiraled in the depths of his mind. Was he ready to confront the shadows that hovered at the periphery? His resolve faltered momentarily, a flickering flame in the growing dark. But then he recalled the words he had written, the promise they held. It would be a journey to define what it meant to rise from the ashes. The next day would unveil a confrontation he hadn't anticipated, an old rival showing up at the ranch, a symbol of everything he once feared. Would Jake summon the courage to stand against ghosts of his past, or would he falter yet again? The crack of dawn arrived with an unexpected chill. Jake awoke to the sound of hooves thudding against the dirt, instinctively alert. He peered out the window, the ranch bathed in the soft light of early morning, yet his heart raced with apprehension. The specter of the rival he had both anticipated and dreaded loomed over him like storm clouds promising rain. It was a reminder of his past, a reminder of the man he used to be, and the choices he had made. As he moved through his morning routine, he could feel the tight coil of anxiety tightening within him. The chores he had embraced with enthusiasm now felt like hurdles, each bringing him closer to an inevitable confrontation. For Jake, there was no escaping the waves of doubt crashing against his resolve. He needed to gather himself, but self-doubt whispered lies that stung like cold wind. Focus on the day, he coached himself, clutching the edges of the rusty sink as he washed his hands. The cold water splashed against his skin, shocking him into the moment. He inhaled deeply, willing himself to remember the ink-fueled promise he had felt just a few nights ago. He glanced at his notebook resting on the table, and a flicker of determination ignited within him. As he stepped out of the house, the vastness of the ranch unfolded before him, vast and open, and for a moment he sought solace in its familiar embrace. He could feel every muscle in his body responding, still reflecting the effort of hard days that had led him to this moment. He tackled the early tasks with a renewed sense of purpose, driven not merely to distract himself, but to steel his resolve for the day ahead. Midday approached, and the sun bore down warmly, yet Jake felt the chill inside of him grow.
The sound of tires crunching gravel tore through the silence of afternoon, unraveling any pretense of calm. He wiped dirt from his hands, satisfied he had completed his chores, yet the very act had been a means of escaping the reality waiting for him.
Jake stepped into view, coming face to face with his past. There stood Ryan, a figure drenched in familiarity and contempt, the symbol of everything Jake had renounced. Ryan's confidence radiated off of him like heat from the sun, and beneath it, Jake felt the familiar stirrings of insecurity. Every fiber of his being screamed to retreat, but he had made a promise, to rise, to confront, to be unbound. "Jake, been a while," Ryan called out, a smirk dancing across his lips, condescending and knowing. "Yeah, a long while," Jake managed, emotions churning within him like a tempest. Every syllable carried the weight of unspoken history, the scars Ryan had left, the wounds that Jake had tried to mend. "What, thought you could hide out here forever?" Ryan sneered, taking a step closer, invading the space Jake had cultivated as a sanctuary. The challenge was clear, a gauntlet thrown down at his feet. Jake solidified his stance, fighting the urge to retreat. "I'm not hiding," he said, his voice steady, stronger than he felt. "I'm rebuilding." "Rebuilding?" Ryan laughed, a harsh sound that echoed around them. "What a joke. You think you can just forget who you were?" As the words sank in, Jake felt the raging storm inside him intensify. It made him question if he truly had the strength to face what he had long buried. Yet beneath the surface of his pounding heart was the tenacity he's found in writing, the resilience of vulnerability he had begun to embrace. "Actually, I'm not trying to forget," Jake replied, his voice firm, unmistakable conviction rising from the ashes of doubt. "I'm ready to confront it." Ryan's expression shifted, the challenge ignited. But Jake knew this was his moment, a chance to etch a new narrative, one where he was not merely a shadow of past failures, but a man willing to stand and fight for his worth. Yet, as the heat of confrontation simmered in the air, Jake could feel the uncertainty weaving through him, and an internal clock ticked ominously. Was he truly ready? The air thickened with unsaid words and unresolved emotions as Jake stood at the crossroads of his past and the uncertain future. Would he cement his growth in that moment of reckoning, or would he allow the past to pull him under? As Ryan leaned in closer, the challenge unmistakable, Jake prepared to answer the calls of his past, but he could already sense the stakes rising with every heartbeat. The moment of truth loomed on the horizon. The silence broke with the weight of Ryan's gaze, a challenge pulsing between them like a live wire. Jake felt its intensity, each heartbeat matching the rhythm of unimaginable tension. This was not merely a confrontation. This was the crux of his evolution. The past had shaped him, but within it lay the potential for a transformed future. "Is this your idea of rebuilding?" Ryan taunted, his voice dripping with mockery. "A few chores and some daydreaming? You think writing will make you whole again?" Jake clenched his fists, grounding himself against the tide that sought to pull him under. His journey had begun far from just a pastime. Writing had become a sanctuary, a vessel for his chaos, a way to channel the fragments of a life he was beginning to piece together. "It's more than that, Ryan. It's about understanding who I am now." "What a cliché," Ryan sneered, stepping back slightly but not relinquishing the challenge. The slight retreat felt like a victory to Jake, a tiny crack in his rival's armor. He could sense a shift. Perhaps Ryan was not as steady as he would like to project. Jake leaned into the moment, his determination rekindled. "You don't know anything about me. I'm not that kid you picked on anymore. I've started to see my worth beyond your opinions." Ryan's laughter cut through the air, but Jake felt the sting carry less weight. He was not looking for validation. He was simply affirming his existence. Behind those words, however, loomed the question he had yet to confront. Could he maintain this stance against Ryan's venomous history? "You think you've grown up? That you've faced your demons?" Ryan scoffed, his words a dagger aimed at Jake's heart. "I'm facing them now," Jake answered, his voice steady despite the tumult inside. He felt the weight of his past, regrets, mistakes, all hovering dangerously. But he also felt the push of new possibilities,
the spark of transformation igniting within him. If he could write about his struggles, perhaps he could also harness that strength here and now. As the words settled between them, Jake noticed something flicker in Ryan's eyes. Was it uncertainty? A rare glimpse of vulnerability? "Look, Jake," Ryan said, his tone suddenly shifting. "You and I both know how this ends. You cannot change who you are. That will always be the truth lurking in your shadows." Every part of Jake screamed to retreat and hide from that truth, yet he refused the familiar route of avoidance. "I'm done living in shadows," he declared, his voice rising with newfound resolve. "I'm ready to stand in the light, no matter what the cost." With the air thick with tension, Ryan met his gaze, each glaring in the mirror of their choices. The vulnerability that Jake now recognized in himself, this willingness to confront his fears, was the anchor he had been searching for. He could feel the internal conflict wrestle for dominance, but that pull of self-doubt felt weaker now. "Watch yourself, Jake. You may think you're rebuilding, but allow me to show you the destruction you're truly capable of," Ryan warned, his voice low and pointed. But Jake could not allow that fear to dictate his actions any longer. He had experienced destruction and nearly succumbed to it. Now he clung to the beginnings of resilience. The challenge lingered, waves of uncertainty crashing with every breath. Behind that confrontation loomed the question of his true strength. Could he emotionally endure the battle unfolding between them?
And as the afternoon sun dipped closer to the horizon, casting long shadows across the ranch, Jake stood tall, feeling the rush of courage pulse through him. Still, the journey felt unfinished, and he realized that to truly answer Ryan's challenge, he had to confront not only the shadows from within, but the choices he was yet to make. The weight of the moment pressed down on him, but he felt the flicker of resolve. This was where his transformation would take root. The air crackled with unresolved tension, and as Jake took a steadying breath, he wondered what the next phase of his evolution would demand. Would he finally define himself on his own terms, or was the weight of his past still too heavy to bear? His fingers brushed against the edge of his notebook tucked in his back pocket. There, he had begun to carve his identity into words. What words would he choose to define this moment, and what narrative would unfold in the chapters ahead? The answers hung in the balance as Ryan stepped closer, challenge still etched on his features, and Jake prepared for the decisions that would shape his journey further. The confrontation had opened a door, but would he step through it? Jake stood rooted in place as Ryan's words echoed in his mind, each syllable a reminder of battles yet to be fought. Feeling the heat of the late afternoon sun against his back, he forced himself to recall the serenity he found in writing. In those moments, he had the power to sculpt his reality, not just the words, but the very essence of who he wanted to become. Stepping away from the confrontation, he instinctively wandered toward the corral. Each hoofbeat sounded like a pulse beneath the horizon, steady and unwavering, offering a stark contrast to the chaos brewing within him. The horses, wild and free, were a symbol of potential, a reminder that he too could break free from the confines of his past. "Focus, Jake," he murmured, shaking his head as he approached the railing. He glanced at his notebook, still tucked away, its blank pages waiting to be filled with the story of his evolution. This writing was more than therapy. It was a testament to his new resolve. He had the potential to ignite change, not just for himself, but for others who might stumble upon his words. The challenge posed by Ryan loomed large, but as he gazed toward the horizon, an epiphany began to crystallize. What if the journey he chronicled could provide a roadmap for his own transformation? And what if his experiences could resonate beyond the confines of the ranch, sparking the same courage in others that he was striving to find? "Maybe I'm not just reconstructing a life," he mused aloud. "Maybe I'm building a legacy." But he knew that for this vision to materialize, the confrontation was only the beginning. He had to grapple with the truth behind Ryan's words and understand how deeply they resonated within him. The stakes were higher than they had ever been. Jake felt the familiar flicker of doubt, but this time it stoked a flame of determination. Writing isn't just an escape, he thought, swiftly jotting his reflections into the notebook. It's a confrontation of sorts. The pages will become my battleground, where I can hold myself accountable. Each stroke of his pen became a revelation as he unearthed memories of fear and regret and how they had shaped his identity. With each word, he began to craft a version of himself that was anchored in resilience. He began to see clarity between who he was and who he aspired to be. But the questions lingered. Could he withstand the fury of Ryan's words without breaking down? Could he become a beacon of hope for himself and for others? The distance between doubt and belief felt vast, yet with every line he penned, Jake felt momentum building. Perhaps confronting these fears through his writing was the means to bridge that gap. As twilight descended, the sky turned a vibrant shade of orange, painting the backdrop for his introspection. It was time to face Ryan again, but this time, not as the kid intimidated by history. Jake had evolved. He was ready to embody the steadfast resolve he was crafting through his words. With renewed purpose, he gathered the courage to step back toward Ryan, the shadows of his past trailing behind him, but no longer dictating his path. Each step felt more deliberate, fueled by the narrative he was weaving. Standing firm, Jake met Ryan's gaze, taking solace in knowing that despite the turbulence around him, he was learning to harness his strength in written form and personal conviction. The uncertainty still hung heavy, but the anticipation of what was to come surged through him like the pulse of a wild stallion. The confrontation they had ignited was not merely about reflection, but also redemption. He would not shy away from challenges or allow himself to crumble. Instead, he would confront Ryan and the incipient chaos, demand his own growth, and ultimately carve his destiny. And as he approached Ryan, breathing deeply, a thought struck him. Was this moment not only about standing up to Ryan, but also about embracing who he wanted to become? The answer unfolded just as Ryan opened his mouth to speak, a new chapter ready to be written. Would Jake seize the reins, or allow fear to write the plot for him? Jake stood his ground, the fading light illuminating the contours of his resolute stance. The tension hung thick in the air, an electrifying charge that transformed the rocky history between him and Ryan into a crucible for rebirth. No longer would he allow himself to shrink under the weight of uncertainty. He had wrestled with enough shadows. Now was the time to step into the brilliance of self-defined glory. "Let's get one thing straight," he began, his voice steadier than he felt, resonating with the authenticity that had steered his journey. "I'm no longer the kid you used to pick on.
I'm done carrying the burdens of your judgments." For a moment, surprise flickered in Ryan's eyes, as if taken aback by the force of Jake's evolution. Yet Jake pressed on, reveling in the power of his words. This was about more than just standing up to Ryan. It was a reclamation of his narrative, an opportunity to articulate the fears he had once hidden beneath layers of self-doubt. "I've spent too long believing I couldn't rise," Jake continued, emboldened. "But I'm here, I'm fighting, and I'm building something real, something worth standing for." As those final words hung in the air, Jake witnessed the shift in Ryan's demeanor. The wall of bravado began to crack, revealing the uncertainty that ran deep within. In Jake's courageous confrontation, he realized he wasn't merely facing his rival, he was confronting the ghost of fear that had plagued him since his fall from grace. "You think this is your redemption?" Ryan asked, the challenge dulling, becoming more inquisitive. "You think you'll just move past everything you've done?" "Moving on doesn't mean forgetting," Jake countered, steel in his gaze. "It means acknowledging my past and allowing it to fuel my future. I'm learning to rise every day, embracing the cracks in my foundation. That's where the light comes in." With that, Jake took a step closer, the distance shrinking, but it was not an act of aggression. It was an invitation for Ryan to understand, a reflection of mutual humanity. The once tight coil of anxiety loosened in Jake's chest, replaced by the warmth of newfound confidence. Ryan's expression softened, revealing layers of introspection. "I'm not the boy I used to be either, Jake. We all have our battles," he confessed, an unexpected admission that reverberated through the air. Those words hung between them, and for the first time Jake recognized that his rival was more than a mere antagonist. They were both men, each navigating their journeys of redemption and identity, trying to pave a way through regrets and mistakes. "Then let's own our stories together," Jake proposed boldly. "This ranch is filled with possibility, and I invite you to witness it, to see what it can become, what we can become." Ryan's gaze softened further, the tension shifting towards a tentative understanding. "I can give you props for being brave, Jake. Maybe it's time to look beyond past judgments both ways." As Jake watched Ryan take a step back and nod his head, a wave of relief washed over him.
The moment had transformed from confrontation to something resembling reconciliation, a pivotal change that reinforced Jake's growth. With the sun sinking lower in the sky, casting fiery hues across the land, Jake felt a resurgence of hope enveloping him. It was here, within this confrontation, he had proven to himself the power of vulnerability, recognition, and connection.
Transitioning from the poetry of confrontation, Jake turned inward to the narrative he continued to write, one of perseverance and authenticity. He could sense his evolution taking root, a commitment to both himself and others, binding him to a higher purpose. As Ryan departed, Jake stood alone for a moment, absorbing the significance of this encounter. He had faced the ghosts of his past, transforming shadows into stepping stones and fortifying his resolve against fear. Reaching into his pocket, he touched his notebook, feeling the indentations of his hours of reflection, the words that would define his future. He would pen the truth of his journey. He would write the story of a man rising through the ashes of a painful legacy, determined to weave a tapestry of hope, resilience, and human connection. Jake returned to the corral, a new light within and around him. The pulse of life coursed through him, igniting the path he would forge ahead, a tapestry rich with story, authenticity, and the strength that comes from embracing every facet of the human experience. This was more than a triumph over Ryan. It was a celebration of transformation, a vow to navigate complexities with courage and to always seek the light, even within darkness. With each step forward, Jake was finally becoming the man he always aspired to be, a man who could lead with confidence, proving that through confrontation and vulnerability, personal achievements could wonderfully blossom. In this culmination of his journey, Jake had conquered not only the judgment of others, but had ultimately defined his identity on his own terms. He felt a clear purpose rising within him, an unwavering belief that growth came from facing fears head-on, and it was his time to shine brightly as the man he was truly meant to be. If you want to follow Jake's incredible journey and witness more powerful transformations, you need to subscribe now. This is the moment to show your support. Leave a like now to make sure these emotional stories reach more people who need that spark in their lives. Comment below your thoughts and reactions about Jake's journey and the incredible lessons learned. And don't wait even one more second to share this video with at least 5 friends who could use a little inspiration in their lives. Let's spread the power of transformation together.